We are so completely screwed. Hey, we may have just started out on this adventure, but I studied magic under some of the greatest wizards of our time. I am here to avenge my father's legacy. I promised my village that I would return with the Staff of Power, and I mean to keep that promise. I am here to begin a journey into greatness, and we are not going to fall here at this first challenge. The goblins whip you for 6 points of damage. Oh yeah, I'm down. Yeah, I'm out. GMing is easy for me. I honestly don't see what the problem is. I watch some of these advice videos and I can't really relate to any of them because I've never had any of those problems. Is this helpful advice? The point I'm trying to make is that I'm aware that most people's brains don't work like mine. I am constantly creating new scenarios. I can very easily improvise an entire session based off of nothing within a few minutes. And although I watch a variety of advice channels, most of them focus on Dungeons and Dragons, I genuinely can't relate to most of the problems that they have. But presumably most people who watch those videos and who will watch this video have brains that are capable of doing useful things like taxes and remembering what happened yesterday. Seriously, I have like the worst memory you could possibly imagine. I genuinely can't remember anything that's ever happened. This is my curious intro to what is going to be a mini-series here of me talking about how to improvise a story, or indeed how I improvise a story, or at least some vague idea of how I improvise a story. Because again, it's just something that I can sort of do. And to avoid this being a 3-hour video, this is part 1 of I don't know how many. I haven't finished writing it yet. And in this first part, I want to just lay out a few principles and where I'm coming from with this. Like I say, I watch a lot of advice channels, partly because I find the people on them interesting, but a lot of them feel like they boil down to the same problem. And that's that you have a boring story. There are some advice channels on here that will openly defy the concept of playing these games as if they are story games. And I can understand vaguely where that comes from with D&D. D&D, as I've said in previous videos, is a miniatures war game with role-playing layered over the top. It does a good job of being a miniatures war game, and it does an okay job of being a role-playing game, but when the two mesh, they just don't work. It is an absolute garbage fire, in my opinion. The way I run D&D is my combat sessions and my roleplay sessions are very separate. I will rarely dip into combat during what I consider a narrative session, and when we do reach combat I will tend to end the session there and have the next session be entirely about it. I like both halves of the system, I just think that they're absolute crap when they are moulded together. And if you like the hack and slashy strategy side of D&D, then great, you can just do that and don't worry about the story, don't worry about the narrative, don't worry about the game being interesting, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Ultimately, I have board games and war games that are better balanced. They're just designed to work that way and they just work better. I'd rather be playing them. I am playing role-playing games to tell a story with a group of people, and that is what most players want. In fact, I'm prepared to say that players who say they aren't here to tell a story are lying. DMs who say they don't want to tell a story are also either lying or just bad at their game. There are 3 reasons I think this. Number 1, actual play shows have heavily lent into the storytelling aspects of the game, and that seems to be what people latch onto. Yes, Critical Role and such do a pretty good job of running the combat as well, but really it's the story and the characters that you're sticking around for. Second, the advice you get on these channels, even for people who openly decry the concept of telling a story, still leans in the direction of engaging players. And the reason your players aren't engaged is because your story is boring. And the third reason I think this is because the vast majority of games other than D&D immediately push in the story direction. Some games are even almost entirely story. Fate, for example, that we run on this channel, is a heavily story and narrative-led game. A lot of games really strip the mechanics out because that's not the interesting part. You can give advice on how to create more engaging NPCs, how to build maps, how to expand worlds, how to make sure that your plot hooks are noticed, but ultimately the problem is that your story is boring and your players don't care about it. Even if to the point where your players are on their phone when it's other people's turns in combat, it's because they don't care how the combat turns out, because it doesn't matter to the story. It's just a random encounter that they are having to grind their way through, and they don't really care about it. Story is at the heart of all these games. We are all here to tell a story, whether you admit it or not. And if you're really not here to care about that at all, then play a video game, or play a war game, play a board game, play something strategic. You will get more out of it, trust me. And the even strange thing for me from this DM advice, particularly from people who decry the concept of story, is that it's almost always designed to railroad your players as much as possible. Advice is often that if the players are going in the opposite direction that you thought they would, just simply angle the game around so it meets them at the end. That's just railroading. How is that not railroading? You're just tricking your players into thinking they have agency when they actually don't. On top of all of that, the sandbox isn't as interesting as you think it is. Actually, it's kind of boring. Players like the idea of being able to go in any direction and do anything, but they want there to be something there for them to do. If you don't have anything in place, a story, if for lack of a better term, then there's nothing for the players to mess with, which is what they really want to do. They don't actually want freedom, they want to be able to mess with something that's in place, because that's the one thing they can't do in a video game. In a video game, there is usually a story, but that story has a logical conclusion, and you can only do so many things along the way towards it. And that's what you play tabletop role-playing games to avoid. You want to be able to create any number of branching paths, an infinite number of possibilities. If you just had a straight line to get to the end where the reward was, well then why are you playing a tabletop game? That's a complete waste of the resources you have in front of you. But I'm here to tell you that you don't have to have an entire fleshed out world, a selection of locations, a list of NPCs, a variety of plot hooks and quests branching out all over this imagined world in order to achieve this. You can do it very easily by simply writing your game to what the players want, one thing at a time, fleshing it out as you go. Now, people who don't get it will mistake that for railroading because there is really only one path that the story could have taken. It just has gone all over the place. There's no branches, there's no options for the players. Whatever they do is technically the right thing to do because that's just the way the story will go. There's no correct answer, incorrect answer. The players will pick an option and then you just create the game in that direction. But as long as you remain true to what the players want, which is the hard part to predict, then it will always be a unique experience. There's a couple of talking points I want to latch onto in this first video. Number one is the DM crisis, as generally referred to. That is the lack of dungeon masters. What is supposedly pushing Wizards of the Coast in the direction of AI DMs. Which honestly kind of makes sense to me. Dungeons & Dragons is not a very good narrative game, so AI DMs could quite easily run a preset adventure. I mean, a lot of DMs I imagine run the preset adventures. I wouldn't know, I've never read one of them. So in those regards, an AI DM kind of makes sense. It wouldn't work for a lot of other games, but D&D is mechanical enough that it could do the job. The other frequent point, and a lot of advice revolves around this, is what to do when the players do something unexpected. As the saying goes, no game survives contact with the players. That second one genuinely baffles me because that's never happened to me. My players have thought that it's happened because they assumed that they had gone off on a tangent that I hadn't prepared for, but I hadn't really prepared for anything. Like, literally nothing. I'm genuinely writing session to session. I might have a vague idea of where the story might go in certain circumstances, but I have made no plans whatsoever. So when the players do something unexpected, it's not actually unexpected. I wanted them to do something, and then whatever they did, I would work through. And they will occasionally apologise for going off on such a tangent, but like, it doesn't matter to me. They haven't ruined anything. They haven't confused me. They haven't thrown a curveball that I can't catch. It's just is what's happening next. It's fine. My players can't derail my game because it was never on the rails. And if that's a concern of yours, that just means that yours was. Again, this comes back to my choices. There are no bad choices in my game. They're just choices. If you have an issue with this, then that just means that there were right and wrong choices, and you wanted your players to make the right choices. You wanted your players to railroad themselves voluntarily. This becomes a problem because DMs are expected to be fully prepared for every eventuality, but why? Why bother with that? You don't have to have mapped out your entire world. You don't even have to fully understand the concepts of it. I improvised an entire pantheon of gods and a concept of the creation of the universe at one point. I just spat it out and it just sort of happened. And it's vaguely canon now. And new DMs are therefore put off because they think that they have to know a certain amount or have a certain amount of creativity to do it. Now, I'm not saying that what I'm suggesting isn't very creative. Obviously it is, and I am a very creative person. But even as a very creative person, I don't generally do that. I don't generally deep dive into some complex world building with my games because it doesn't interest me that much. I've spoken before on the channel about lazy players, and I think that lazy players is the bigger problem of this shortage of dungeon masters. Not players who are too lazy to be dungeon masters, but lazy players burdening dungeon masters with the burden of having to create the entire game. Players who don't bother to lean into the tropes or bother to pick up on what the DM is putting down. Players who really would be happier just playing a video game. They want something spoon-fed to them that they can press the right buttons and win. But I want to say that with the minimum amount of preparation, you can run a very efficient game with increased player agency, a deeper narrative, and a more reactive world, because really that's what the players want. They can get a linear adventure or even a branching adventure from a video game. They can get a sandbox from a video game. What they can't get from other sources is a living, breathing world that reacts to them in real time, something that they can really feel like they've influenced. That's what players want. They want the larger story, they want the bigger picture, and they want that bigger picture to matter that they existed. And you can build that from something very small. And if you're thinking this is way too much for me, I'm not a writer, I'm not a storyteller, I can't figure this one out. Well, you know who else isn't a very good storyteller? Matthew Mercer. I know it's going to be kind of a controversial thing to say. He's a very good dungeon master, don't get me wrong, and he's telling a very engaging story, but the players in that game are really putting the work in. Check out this video, I don't know where it's going to appear, but I made a video about it. The players in Critical Role are a really key component to the drive of that story, and Mercer himself is okay. He can write a linear narrative, and Critical Role is fairly railroaded as games go, a bit too railroaded for my liking. But if you compare some of the differences between Season 1 and The Legends of Vox Machina, the changes they made in the animated show are genuinely better. They're improvements from the narrative of the game to the narrative of the show, because there are actual writers on that, and they are fixing the gaps in Matt Mercer's ideas, or they're polishing off his ideas, or they're changing his ideas so that they make better narrative sense. The most obvious one is Vex and Vax's father, who is a complete dick in the show. In Campaign 1 they generally refer to him as a dick, but when he actually shows up, it's very clear that Mercer doesn't know how to play that. He's not sure how to push that narrative. He doesn't know how to play a genuinely nasty person. He can play a villain, but that's a different story entirely. But a just low-grade, crappy human being he's less comfortable with. And he doesn't know how to write that character in a way that works for the narrative without it getting in the way of the players, or without the players having the opportunity to simply squash him like a bug, because they're D&D characters, they're basically gods. The show, however, can have the player characters artificially react to that character, so they can make him as much of a dick as it logically makes sense for him to be. He's a better character in the animated show than he is in Campaign 1, because his character in Campaign 1 doesn't really fit with how we've been told he is, or how he's meant to be, because, like I say, Matt Mercer, not an amazing writer. He's a competent writer, in the D&D setting for sure, but he doesn't know how to craft that kind of subtle narrative. I don't mean to put down other advice channels. I like other advice channels, but I just often think they don't get to the core. They're often too hung up, as D&D, because they're D&D players, they're often too hung up on the details, and D&D is a minutia heavy game, and the bigger picture will fix a lot of those details for you. You don't need to know all this piddly little crap if you can get a narrative that the players can really sink their teeth into. They will, if you're lucky, fill in a lot of gaps for you. So yeah, I really think that there's a larger picture that's being missed here. But I do love all these advice channels that I subscribe to. I am a fan of them. I do like watching them. Occasionally I just see them talking about stuff that I'm like, you've really missed the point here. And whenever they say that story is bad, or like they don't think it should be a storytelling game, I just think it's silly. It's just so silly. That's exactly what it should be. That's exactly what it is. It's a storytelling game for telling stories, just collectively as a group, and it's very, very, very silly to suggest that it isn't. I'm writing this series currently, so if you have any specific questions that you would like to ask, pop them in the comments below. Join the Discord server as well, that's in the links below. But yeah, jump in the comments, tell me what you would like to see as part of this series, what questions you have specifically, what pitfalls, what things you've fallen into, what things that advice that you've seen on other channels that you don't quite make sense of, or that you're unsure. But anyway, I'm back in the studio, I'm back doing these bigger videos again. Hopefully we will get some more structure going on here. Thank you for watching. Please do like and subscribe. Keep an eye out for this little mini run that I'm doing. Each one will have its own little focus. Do watch the actual play stuff that we've currently got coming up now. There should hopefully be videos almost every week from now on. Watch my other rants, watch my other whatevers. I don't know. If you want to support the channel, you can go into the Ko-fi page, which is linked below. Click on all the things, press the buttons, just do like the YouTube things. I'm going to try and make more use of the studio space that I've recently just sort of rebuilt, and we're going to try and get some proper actual filming on the plans. I think some like actual little short filmy stuff, which should be a good laugh. But yeah, thank you for watching. The end.